As is the case with essentially anything from Star Wars, there's always the potential of some new and returning characters that we essentially already know of within the Star Wars franchise that could show up in whether it's different books, games, movies, whatever the case may be. And today I wanted to talk about some of the potential characters that we could see in Jedi Survivor that are either new to the franchise, as in the Jedi franchise, so they're characters that we already know but they haven't been in this game franchise, or even returning characters who were in Fallen Order already, because personally I do think there's going to be a couple of very familiar faces. So strap in, put on those tinfoil hats and come along with me. And with that being said as well, if you guys have anyone that you think could show up as well as obviously just discussing the ones that I go through, be sure to leave your comments down below because I do very much enjoy reading all the speculation around the game leading up to launch. Now I'm going to start with the very obvious one for me, and this is the Ninth Sister. Obviously we see her in Fallen Order, and she was technically already a canon character within Star Wars. She was in some of the Vader comics, and that's how she actually lost her leg, because I believe Vader actually cut it off through essentially discipline. And for me personally, I think it is almost certain that we're going to see the Ninth Sister in Jedi Survivor. Now I know that's, again, maybe a bit of a tinfoil hat theory. A lot of people will say, well, she clearly died in the first game, but I do think that that is one of those deaths where we don't actually see her die. Cal just essentially pushes her off the top of a tree, and if you guys hadn't seen it already, it says something in her bio in Jedi Fallen Order, in like the database that you can check on all the different characters and enemy types, and it essentially hints to the fact that, you know, is she actually dead or not? So they wouldn't put that in the game if they didn't think it themselves. I think she would be a perfect character to bring back because we all obviously know her from the first game, and I'd imagine there are going to be Inquisitors. So again, maybe I shouldn't be saying this with chest because it's a pretty low chance of happening at the end of the day, but I am almost certain we will see the Ninth Sister in this game. I've pretty much thought that ever since the first game came out, and ever since that death, I just kind of thought that is one of those deaths in Star Wars that clearly the character is not dead at all. Now the next one I wanted to talk about is obviously the big boy Darth Vader, and this one's kind of interesting because for me personally, before we'd seen anything about this game, I was like certain we would see Vader again. He was essentially like the final boss in the game, so it would make obvious sense to have the final boss meet Cal again. Now I'm not too sure about that now because it does seem like they're gonna, you know, continue this franchise. I was kind of under the assumption that maybe Cal would end up dying in the second game, but in saying that, it does feel like there'll be more games with Cal in it, and I don't think he can really meet Vader again and survive for a second time. I think if he ever meets Vader, he has to die. Personally, that's just how that feels like it has to go to me. Now obviously that's just my opinion, but I don't want Cal to go toe to toe with Vader again and survive. I want him to essentially get killed by Vader if they do ever meet again, like a hero sacrifice type of death where he saves everyone else, which would also make sense if we never see Cal in the OT era of Star Wars. It would make sense for him to be dead, obviously. So this one I'm not too sure about. Now with that being said, he was the final boss in the last game, so I also wouldn't be surprised if we do see him again. But for Jedi Survivor, I'm actually going to say I don't think we'll see Vader, at least not like as a boss. We might see him in a cutscene or something like that, but I'm definitely not sold that we'll see Vader again, just because I think Cal will survive this game, and if he does and he has another fight with Vader, that's a little bit off for me personally. I don't think there's many Jedi in the galaxy who would be able to survive going toe to toe with Vader twice. Obviously we see now that Obi-Wan did, but that's kind of different. He was his master and he's obviously a very strong Jedi. Cal is obviously strong too, but he's completely untrained compared to most Jedi. So I'm definitely not sold on this one, but I would definitely not say no to seeing Vader again in this game. Now the next one is yet another Inquisitor, and this is the fifth brother. Now the reason I say that is because he's on the cover of the novel that's coming out in March, I think March 7th, and the fact that he's on the cover does feel like it's alluding to the fact that he could be in the game. Now with that being said, maybe they wouldn't spoil that, so maybe he's just in the book and then, you know, that storyline kind of gets resolved. That would also make sense because then it's not really a spoiler for the game. But for me personally, now that we have seen him on that cover, I am feeling relatively confident that we could see the fifth brother in Jedi Survivor. Now it obviously depends on what happens in the novel. They could easily set it up so that he meets him in the book, but then he obviously doesn't meet him in the game. So this is one of those ones that is very hard to tell, but just the fact that he's on the cover to me does at least hint a little bit that he could definitely be in Jedi Survivor. Now the next one isn't necessarily a specific character, this is more just an enemy type, and this is the Purge Troopers. Now I don't believe we've seen a Purge Trooper in either of the trailers so far. Please do correct me if I'm wrong, I'm probably just being an idiot and I've missed them, but I'm pretty sure we haven't seen a Purge Trooper in either of the 2 new trailers. It almost actually looked a bit like those DT Sentry droids are kind of replacements for them, because they do look very similar. They have like the Magna Staff and the other variant. I can't even remember what the other variant was, but they almost look like they could kind of replace those Purge Troopers, and it could make sense like canonically as well, because maybe they've, I guess, phased out those Purge Troopers. It is obviously 5 years later. We know that during this time of the Empire there was a lot of stuff that was from the Republic era that kind of went through this transition, and by the time of the OT everything's obviously very different. So it could be another one of those things where the Purge Troopers were kind of like instated very early on after the end of the Clone Wars, but then towards, you know, the closer we get to the original trilogy era, maybe they've been phased out. So this one's tough. I'm not sure whether we will see Purge Troopers. I really hope we do, because I really like the Purge Troopers. But yeah, the fact we haven't seen them in any trailers when they were kind of like a staple of the first game, I'm definitely very curious to see how that one pans out. Now, the last one on my list here is probably a little bit of a reach, if I'm honest, so chuck those tinfoil hats right back on, boys, but I'm curious as to whether we may see the Grand Inquisitor. For me, it felt like the natural progression. We got a couple of Inquisitors in the first game. One of those in Trilla died, and like I said, technically the Ninth Sister we know is meant to be dead. Now, whether she's actually dead or not, who actually knows? But it did feel like the natural progression of the game that those 2 died, and then Vader went face to face with Cal, and Cal managed to survive it. So maybe Vader would say, alright, I know of this Jedi. It is now your job, Grand Inquisitor, to go and hunt the Jedi down. So kind of like sending in the big guns, because obviously Vader is the big guns, but he might just not really care. He obviously has more pressing matters than someone like Cal. And so pretty much since the end of Jedi Fallen Order, I have really been thinking that we could see the Grand Inquisitor. Now, we obviously see in that first teaser trailer the Powan Senator, and a lot of people thought this was actually the Grand Inquisitor because obviously they're the same species. It obviously turned out to not be him. It is literally just an Imperial Senator. But that being said, they've obviously got a Powan in the game. They've already gone through all of the process of actually making a Powan and designing them and putting them into the game. It's not that far-fetched that they could maybe also add the Grand Inquisitor. Now again, I do think it's a little bit of a reach. I don't necessarily think this one's going to happen anymore, just because the way that the last 2 trailers have panned out, I guess, but I really wouldn't be surprised if we do see the Grand Inquisitor. If this game were to be a trilogy, for example, it would make sense that the first game has 2 like lesser known Inquisitors, the second game might have the Grand Inquisitor and the 5th brother, for example, and then the third and final game could be just Vader hunting him down. Maybe he evades the Grand Inquisitor and Vader gets a little bit cranky at the Grand Inquisitor and says, you know what, I'm gonna go do it myself. To me, that feels like a pretty natural progression, that each game the enemies and the villains are going to get a little bit harder. And so, like I said, I don't think this one's going to happen, but it would not surprise me at all if we do see the Grand Inquisitor. And it could also be one of those things where they showed that Powan Senator in the trailer, kind of like teased us a little bit, because we all kind of thought that could be the Grand Inquisitor. Then we all get almost like disarmed and we go, oh, it's actually not him, so the Grand Inquisitor won't be in the game. And then what do you know? The Grand Inquisitor is actually there in the end. So it's definitely possible. I'm very curious to see if this one does pan out, but like I said, I'm not too sure. I think this one is maybe a little bit of a reach, but we will just have to wait and see. Like I said though, guys, I'm very keen to hear your thoughts on obviously all the ones that I mentioned in the video, but if there's anyone that I missed that you think could potentially show up, whether it's someone from the first game or just someone that we know in Star Wars that we didn't see in the first game, be sure to leave your own speculations and theories down below, because it is always very good fun reading everyone's thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and may the Force be with you always.